The bus wheezed to a stop at the edge of Ravenhill, its doors creaking open like the jaws of some old, tired beast. Emma Carter stepped down into the chill, boots crunching against the gravel road as a sharp wind curled around her ankles. The driver said nothing, only gave her a quick, pitying glance before pulling away, leaving behind a swirl of dust and the long, stretching silence of the village. Ravenhill looked like a place forgotten by time. Stone cottages hunched under heavy roofs of moss and thatch, their windows clouded, their chimneys cold. Ivy curled up their walls like veins on the hand of something very old. Smoke did not rise here, though the air smelled faintly of burning, of something left too long to smolder. As Emma walked, her footsteps echoed faintly against the worn cobblestones, the only sound aside from the occasional caw of distant crows. Villagers peered at her from behind curtains, faces pale and wary, retreating the moment she lifted her gaze to meet theirs. Only their murmured voices followed her progress, carried on the restless wind. "She's another one," one old man muttered, barely audible. "She won't last the night." Emma pulled her coat tighter, her journalist's notebook tucked under one arm, and pressed on. The manor was ahead. It loomed over the village like a sleeping giant, its silhouette cutting hard against the gray sky. Ravenhill Manor, her reason for coming here. A century of unanswered questions and ghost stories hung from its eaves like the vines climbing its broken walls. Windows, cracked and dust-blind, watched her approach like tired, unblinking eyes. Somewhere, a shutter banged lazily in the wind. The iron gate was unlocked, swinging inward with a hollow groan. Emma paused just long enough to notice that the path leading to the door was worn, well used, despite the house's abandoned appearance. Someone still came and went here. She reached the great oak door and knocked once, twice. The sound echoed deep within. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the door opened, slowly, revealing a thin man standing stiffly in the entrance. His black suit was worn at the cuffs, his skin pale like candle wax left too long in the cold. His eyes were the only thing sharp about him, pale blue, too alert, too focused on Emma as though trying to decide whether she was real or some kind of dream. "Miss Carter?" His voice was rough, like dry paper being folded. "You shouldn't have come." Before Emma could answer, the door opened wider, swallowing her into the dimness of Ravenhill Manor. The village behind her felt like it belonged to another world entirely. The air inside Ravenhill Manor smelled of cold stone and old smoke, like a library that hadn't been touched for years. The hall stretched wide before her, lined with portraits in thick, gilded frames, faces long dead, their painted eyes following her as if annoyed by the disturbance. Dust hung in the air, turning the late afternoon sunlight into pale gold where it slanted through the cracked windows. Somewhere deep in the house, floorboards creaked, slow and deliberate, like footsteps taken by someone who knew they weren't alone. Arthur Blackwood led her down the corridor without speaking. His shoes made barely a sound against the warped wooden floor, as though he'd learned long ago how to move through this house without waking its memories. Emma glanced sideways at him, trying to read the pale, unreadable expression on his face, but he offered nothing. Just that same stiffness, that careful silence. He opened a door on the left, a parlor, or maybe once it had been. Now, the fireplace was choked with old ash, the curtains drawn back in tired folds. On one wall hung a portrait larger than the rest, framed in heavy black. The woman in the painting had sharp cheekbones, deep-set eyes, and lips pressed thin like someone halfway between a smile and a curse. Her gown was the color of deep wine, but it was her gaze that caught Emma, dark, watchful, almost alive. "Lady Evelyn," Arthur murmured, noticing her interest. "Last of the Ravenhill line." "She disappeared, didn't she?" Emma asked softly, still staring at the portrait. There was something unnerving about the eyes, something unfinished in them, like they were waiting for the rest of the story. Arthur didn't answer immediately. He moved to the hearth and used a poker to stir at the old gray ashes, though no flame stirred to life. Disappeared, or worse. No one really knows. Emma crossed her arms, her notebook firm against her chest. "I didn't come all this way to chase village rumors, Mr. Blackwood. I've read the reports. 3 disappearances in the last 2 centuries. Another, 50 years ago, never solved. And now another just last month. People are afraid of this place." His hand tightened on the poker. "With good reason." That was all he said. He returned the poker to its stand and looked at her fully for the first time, his pale eyes sharp now, almost desperate. "Miss Carter, you shouldn't have come." A dull sound echoed above them, deep within the bones of the manor, like something heavy shifting across an attic floor. Emma glanced at the ceiling, her reporter's instincts sparking. What was that? Arthur's lips thinned. This house remembers things better left forgotten. But it wasn't just the house that remembered. Later that evening, as the sun bled away behind the hills, Emma lay awake in the cold little guest room Arthur had shown her to. The covers were thin, the mattress older than she was. The wind clawed at the window panes. Somewhere down the hall, that same noise again, soft, deliberate, whispers curling just out of understanding. She got up, slowly, and padded to the door. The hallway stretched long before her, swallowed at the far end by shadow. But she wasn't imagining it. The whispers were coming from the locked east wing, and they were calling her name. The door to the east wing was old, its paint blistered and peeling in long strips like old skin. A heavy lock, tarnished with rust, hung from the handle. It didn't look as though anyone had touched it in decades, but the whispers coming from the other side told a different story. Emma pressed her ear against the cold wood. The voices were faint, curling like smoke, layered atop one another, too many to count, each one lost in its own desperate murmuring. She stepped back, heart pounding, and searched the hallway for anything that might help. If there was a key, she needed to find it, and quickly. In the small study near the stairwell, cluttered with forgotten books and old furniture draped in gray sheets, she started her search. Moonlight spilled in through the cracked window, catching the motes of dust in the air and turning them into drifting stars. The air smelled of mold and paper left too long in the dark. It was a chance discovery, pure accident, or perhaps something else guiding her hand. When her fingers brushed the spine of a leather-bound book pushed deep behind others on a shelf, it felt wrong beneath her touch. The leather cracked, its corners gnawed by insects. She pulled it free, no title on the cover. As she opened it, the brittle pages trembled on the verge of disintegration. But someone's hand had once moved here, long ago, leaving behind words in neat, careful handwriting. It was a diary. Emma sat down by the desk, brushing off a layer of dust, and began reading by the weak glow of her phone's flashlight. The entries were scattered thoughts, sometimes elegant, sometimes frantic, and always the same name appearing again and again. Lady Evelyn. "I made the pact," one line read. "I thought it would save them." Another, "The shadow waits in the hills. Every 50 years. The black hour approaches again. Between two entries, something small fell free and clinked softly on the wood floor. It was a key. Iron, old, black with tarnish, shaped into the form of a raven with its wings outstretched. A gust of air moved through the study then, not from an open window, not from the door, but as if something had drawn breath behind her. Emma froze. The air was suddenly colder. Something moved behind her ear, weightless but undeniable, and with it, the whisper again, clearer this time. "Leave, while you can." She stood slowly, holding the diary in one hand, the key in the other. Whatever was behind the door in the east wing, it wasn't going to stay silent for long. And whatever pact Lady Evelyn had made, its consequences were not finished with Ravenhill yet. The next morning, a thin veil of fog clung to the village like a secret no one dared speak aloud. Emma left the manor early, the iron key heavy in her coat pocket, the diary tucked under her arm. The villagers watched her pass in silence, their eyes not curious, but resigned, as though they had seen this same scene play out before with different faces, different names. She followed the cobblestone path to the last house on the lane, a squat, lopsided cottage wrapped in ivy and sagging at the roof. Here lived Mrs. Holloway, the oldest living soul in Ravenhill. They said she remembered things others tried to forget. Some said she should have left long ago, but others whispered that she stayed because she knew what was coming. The door opened before Emma even knocked. Mrs. Holloway stood framed by the dim interior, wrapped in layers of shawls, her back bent, her eyes sharp as glass buttons. She stared at Emma for a long moment before stepping aside, allowing her to enter without a word. The cottage was warm, thick with the scent of herbs and something metallic beneath it. Old teacups lined the mantel, each one chipped but carefully arranged like sentinels guarding the hearth. Emma sat carefully at the table, laying the diary gently before her. "I know why you've come," Mrs. Holloway said finally, her voice a rasp from years of speaking too little and thinking too much. "They all come in the end. Reporters, historians, ghost hunters. None of them understand." Emma leaned forward. "Then help me understand." Mrs. Holloway's thin lips pressed together. She glanced at the diary but did not touch it. "You know the pattern, don't you? Every 50 years, it takes one of us. No warning, no screams, just gone." She lifted a trembling hand and tapped the table with a yellowed fingernail. "We used to fight it long ago, but fighting it didn't work. The last who tried was Evelyn herself. Thought she could bargain with it." Emma opened the diary to one of the earlier entries. She made a pact. "I," Mrs. Holloway whispered. "The shadow comes from the hills, just like she wrote. But it's not a man, and it's not a ghost. It's something older, something forgotten by the church and feared by those who remembered it. It wants balance, and it takes balance in blood." Emma's mind was racing. The names of the missing, each 50 years apart. Their sudden vanishing, no traces left behind. Lady Evelyn's desperate handwriting echoing through the pages of the diary. "When's the next one due?" Mrs. Holloway looked up, her eyes suddenly watery with something deeper than fear, grief. "Tonight." A heavy stillness settled over them, the weight of generations caught in the breath between them. Outside, the fog curled tighter around the house, as though the hills themselves were listening. Emma's fingers tightened around the iron key. If the legend was true, if Lady Evelyn's words weren't the scribbles of a mad woman, but a warning written in regret, then the black hour was almost here, and someone else would be taken, unless Emma found a way to stop it. Night fell over Ravenhill like a curtain of ink, thick and suffocating. The last streaks of sunset had barely vanished before the fog returned, heavier now, curling through the crooked streets, pressing against the windows of the cottages. Lamps were extinguished one by one, not out of thrift or routine, but fear. By midnight, the entire village was swallowed in a breathless, unnatural hush. Emma stood at the edge of the village, staring toward the dark outline of Ravenhill Ridge. The iron key was warm in her hand now, as though it recognized its purpose. The diary, secured inside her coat, felt like it weighed twice as much as it had that morning. Every word Lady Evelyn had written echoed in her mind, warnings scribbled with ink and dread. The black hour, the veil thins, the gate must remain sealed. But the gate had not remained sealed, and something was stirring beyond the hills. Emma pushed forward through the tall grass, thorns catching at her sleeves, damp earth sucking at her boots. The old path was barely visible, but the moon struggled weakly through the clouds, lighting the way in patches of dull silver. Then, through the tangle of branches, she saw it. The gate. Wrought iron, twisted into elaborate patterns of ravens and vines, the metal warped by age, its hinges rusted but still intact. Emma's breath clouded the air before her, the cold seeping into her bones. Beyond the gate, shapes moved, dark stone ruins overgrown with vines and moss. It might have once been a chapel, but the roof was gone, the walls leaning inward as if trying to collapse on themselves. And carved into the stones, covering every surface, were symbols. Circles within circles, crossed lines, shapes that meant nothing to her, but pulsed with the weight of ancient, forgotten purpose. These were not decorations. They were warnings, desperate, clumsy, scratched by shaking hands. Emma pushed the gate open with a scream of rusted metal. It gave way just enough for her to slip inside. The ground beyond was uneven, cracked by roots, the remnants of what might have been pews or altars now reduced to crumbling piles of stone. Then the wind stopped. Just like that. Silence, so total it hurt. A sound rose from the valley below, soft at first, like the dragging of cloth across stone. Then the whispers began again, louder, more urgent, a chorus of voices all speaking at once but saying nothing that made sense. Emma's heartbeat hammered in her ears, her breath sharp in her throat. From the edges of the fog, something took shape. It wasn't solid, but neither was it mist. It was a figure, or rather the memory of a figure, taller than a man, but without features, its form built from layers of smoke, shifting and coiling in and out of itself. Its eyes, if they could be called eyes, were nothing more than pits of blackness, deep and endless, and they were fixed on her, the shadow. The air around Emma thickened, the temperature dropping with each breath. The iron key in her palm flared, not hot, but cold, biting, as though dipped in ice. The voices rose to a frantic pitch, not around her, but inside her, echoing through her skull, 100 lost souls all trying to speak at once. Emma took a step forward, forcing her legs to move through the weight of her own fear. The shadow shifted toward her, tendrils of its smoky body curling across the stones, caressing the worn carvings of forgotten words. "This ends tonight," Emma said aloud, though her voice trembled. The key's shape felt sharper now, cutting into her skin, drawing a bead of blood where it pressed against her palm. The shadow paused, recoiling slightly as if it smelled that drop of warmth, that single human defiance standing against it. Emma lifted the key high. No more pacts, no more sacrifices. And as the village clock struck midnight, far behind her, a cold wind screamed down from the hills, carrying the cries of the forgotten. Then came the light. The light didn't come from the sky or the ground. It came from the key itself. At first, it was faint, a soft, silvery shimmer along the ridges of the iron. But then it grew, brighter and sharper, filling the ruined chapel with a glow that turned the cracked stones into pale bones. The ancient carvings that surrounded Emma seemed to catch fire, not with flames, but with memory. For a breathless second, she could almost see them as they once were. Fresh, desperate scratches made by hands trembling in fear, scratched by villagers long dead, who had once gathered here in the same hopeless stand she now found herself making. The shadow recoiled, shrinking inward as if folding in on itself. The whispers broke, fragments of voices scattering like leaves in a storm. Emma felt the force of them rush past her, through her, fragments of forgotten names and unfinished prayers. But the shadow wasn't leaving. It was fighting. It lunged forward, a wave of smoky darkness rolling across the broken altar, tendrils reaching for her, curling around her boots, up her legs like a living fog, cold and biting. Emma stumbled backward, pressing the key to her chest, the iron burning with unnatural cold. And then she remembered the diary. With shaking fingers, she tore it from her coat and flung it open to the first page. The dedication written by Lady Evelyn herself. To the one who dares end this curse, speak the name and break the cycle. Emma's lips trembled. She flipped frantically through the pages, searching for the name. The name that Evelyn had given everything to hide, and yet preserve for the moment it was most needed. At the very last page, written faintly in red ink now faded with time, it was there. Corvian. It was not just a name. It was a command. The shadow flinched as she read it, its shapeless head snapping toward her, the black voids of its eyes widening in sudden recognition. Emma's voice steadied, her pulse matching the rise of that ancient light burning brighter around her. Corvian, she said again, louder this time, forcing the word through clenched teeth. The fog screamed. That's the only word for the sound it made. Not the shadow itself, but the air, the ground, the very stones under her feet. The carvings lit up fully now, glowing gold and white, as if the entire ruin had become a vessel of forgotten power, drawn back into life by a word no living soul had dared speak for 100 years. The shadow twisted violently, a cyclone of darkness fighting to hold form, but it was unraveling, thread by smoky thread, pulled backward by the weight of the word. Corvian. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next one. Bye for now.